What if the world's next great choke point crisis does not begin with oil, but with chips? For years, strategic planners have worried about the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy choke points. But there's another choke point that may matter even more in the 21st century: the Taiwan Strait. Because if Hormuz is a warning about the fragility of the energy system, the Taiwan Strait is a warning about the fragility of the technological system. And that may be the deeper shift of the 21st century. The first thing to understand is what makes a choke point strategic in the first place. A strategic choke point is a narrow passage whose disruption can send shockwaves far beyond its geography. It is not just a local problem, it becomes a global one because too much trade, energy, or manufacturing depends on one narrow route. That is exactly what Hormuz represents. Situated between Iran and Oman, it is the only sea passage from the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Energy markets have long treated it as one of the most dangerous single points of failure in the world system. Most of the oil and gas flowing through it has limited alternative routing, and the biggest customers are in Asia, especially China, India, Japan, and South Korea. That is why a Hormuz crisis has long been seen as a recipe for energy inflation, supply shocks, and potentially recession. But now consider the Taiwan Strait. This is not just another busy shipping lane, it is one of the most important arteries of global commerce. The Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated that about $2.45 trillion in goods, more than one-fifth of global maritime trade, transited the Taiwan Strait in 2022. It also noted that nearly half of the global container fleet and close to 90% of the largest container ships pass through the strait. That alone would make it strategically important. But the Taiwan Strait matters for another reason that is arguably even bigger: semiconductors. If Hormuz is the oil artery of the global economy, Taiwan is one of the digital brains behind it. Taiwan sits at the center of the world's most advanced chip manufacturing ecosystem, and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company TSMC remains dominant in making chips for other companies at a scale few rivals can match. By 2026, Counterpoint estimated that TSMC held 72% of the pure play foundry market, meaning companies that manufacture chips for outside customers, while Taiwan's role in the most advanced chips remained extraordinarily concentrated. And that changes the meaning of disruption. Oil can be stockpiled, supply can sometimes be rerouted, prices can surge, but markets still have mechanisms for adjustment. Advanced chips are different. These are not simple commodities. They are highly specialized components that sit at the center of artificial intelligence, smartphones, cloud infrastructure, military systems, advanced electronics, and modern manufacturing. If their supply is cut, the problem is not only inflation, it is production paralysis. That is why the Taiwan Strait increasingly looks like a mirror of Hormuz, but a more dangerous one. Hormuz threatens an energy shock. Taiwan threatens a systemic shock to the technological economy, and that difference matters. A Hormuz crisis would likely center on regional conflict and energy flows. The main weapon would be the disruption of oil and gas transit. The immediate effect would be price spikes, shortages, and economic stress. A Taiwan crisis would be different. It would likely involve a great power confrontation over one of the most important manufacturing hubs on Earth. The tools would not just be naval pressure, but military coercion, cyber disruption, quarantine tactics, and blockade scenarios. And Beijing has been showing more and more openly that it is thinking in exactly those terms. Reuters reported that Joint Sword 2024A, a large-scale Chinese military exercise around Taiwan, involved mock missile strikes and operations designed to test pressure on Taiwan, and later Chinese drills were described as practicing a key port blockade aimed at severing Taiwan's maritime lifelines, including energy imports. That is what makes the comparison with Hormuz so important. China does not need to copy the Gulf to create a similar shock. It only needs to exploit Taiwan's dependence on trade, energy imports, and external connectivity. and that vulnerability is real. Taiwan imports nearly all of its energy, and Reuters reported in 2023 that CPC Corporation, Taiwan's state owned energy company, said the island's gas reserves covered only about 11 days of normal use, with a goal of raising that to at least 14 days by 2027. In a real blockade scenario, that is a very limited buffer. So, if China can pressure Taiwan's ports, shipping lanes, and LNG intake points, it is not just threatening trade, it is threatening the island's ability to function. That is where the Taiwan Strait begins to look less like a normal shipping corridor and more like a strategic pressure valve for the entire modern economy. And the economic stakes are enormous. Bloomberg Economics estimated in 2024 that a war over Taiwan could cost the world roughly $10 trillion, dollars, or about 10% of global GDP. Rhodium Group estimated that even a blockade style disruption would put well over $2 trillion dollars of global economic activity at risk, and it treated that as a floor rather than a ceiling. That is why this issue matters so much. The old dependency was oil. The new dependency is technological concentration. The old fear was that a closure of Hormuz could trigger a recession. The newer fear is that a crisis in the Taiwan Strait could break the digital supply chains that modern economies now rely on for everything from cars to data centers to defense systems. And that leaves us with a more sobering conclusion. For years, the world treated Hormuz as the classic example of strategic vulnerability. But the Taiwan Strait may now reveal something even more serious, that the world has built the technological economy on top of a supply chain that runs through one of the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints on Earth. In other words, Hormuz taught the world what energy fragility looks like. Taiwan may show us what technological fragility looks like. And the deeper question is no longer just whether the world can survive another oil shock, it is whether the global system is prepared for a crisis that severs not only fuel flows but the digital arteries of modern power itself. Thank you for staying with the analysis. If you value strategic clarity over noise, subscribe to the channel for the next perspective.